If I could get everyone's attention, please, I'm going to call the meeting to order for the Procurement Appeals Board hearing. For the record, I'd like to let everyone in the room know that we do have a court reporter here today, and she will be taking notes and doing a transcription of today's events. So if you're called upon to speak, please identify yourself so that she knows who is speaking, and she is able to take note of that in her notes. With that, first of all, I would like to turn this over to Nikki Ecke just for to do a reading of the Appeals of Decisions announcement. And Nikki Ecke represents me today as the attorney for the Procurement Appeals Board.
Appeal of decisions from the Procurement Appeals Board. Pursuant to Section 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Procurement Appeals Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of certiorari. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the Board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met.
Okay. And then second of all, I would like for Ms. Ecke to present the announcement for the specific appeal to be heard today.
Before the Procurement Appeals Board today is the appeal of Nashville Adventure Park, Inc. regarding the intent to award issued with respect to RFQ 969636, rehabilitation and lease of Greer Stadium property. After an administrative hearing, the purchasing agent dismissed the protest filed by Nashville Adventure Park. Nashville Adventure Park has appealed the purchasing agent's determination.
Okay. Before we begin the presentations, I would like to walk through the instructions of how today's session is going to go, and you may wish to take notes, and there are also handouts that are available in the room in terms of time that will be allotted for each party. First of all, we will have an initial presentation by the purchasing agent, and that shall be limited to 40 minutes. And then that will be followed by 40 minutes from the appealing party. And after that, we will have an opportunity for a rebuttal from the purchasing agent, which will be limited to 30 minutes, as well as the appellate. And then at the end of that, we will give an opportunity for other interested parties to present any information that they may have to this board that they wish to be considered. And then the board will deliberate and make a determination as to the result of today's events. I would ask you that during the time we do have a timekeeper back here. During this time, that there not be any interruptions of anyone's remarks, because we want to be respectful of each person's allotted time. And you will have an opportunity to rebut any remarks made in that second portion of today's hearing. So once again, I would ask that there be no interruptions during that process as people present. Okay, are there any questions in terms of process? And then I'm going to do introductions next. Are there any questions in terms of process?
Well, I would like for either you or Nikki to speak specifically about the authority of this board.
And that it's really about the procurement process.
Okay.
It's what we can address, not all the other issues that are on this issue.
Okay, we'll do that. Why don't we really quickly, just because she may not know who you are, Nancy, let us go around the table so that everyone knows who everyone is at the table. I'll start down here at the end. First of all, we'll be introducing the members of the Procurement Appeals Board.
My name is Michelle Donegan, and I'm the Director of the Department of Emergency Communications.
My name is Scott Potter. I'm the Director of Metro Water Services.
Toya Lomax O'Neill, I'm Finance Director, and I serve as Procurement Appeals Board Chair.
Nikki Eke, attorney for the Procurement Appeals Board.
Nancy Whittemore, Director of General Services.
Monica Faulknesson, Executive Director of the Metro Sports Authority.
Those are the members of the Appeals Board, and then the staff here.
My name is Michelle Hernandez-Lane. I'm Chief Procurement Officer for the City of Nashville.
Jeff Gossage. I served as the purchasing agent between January 2005 and June 17th. June 17th. Announced the move to MMPS June 1 and transitioned July 1. So I was the purchasing agent during the period of the solicitation and the protest hearing.
My name is Macy Amos from Metro Legal. I'm representing the purchasing agent.
We need the people at the table.
Devinder Sandhu with this Nashville Adventure Park. Devinder Sandhu with Nashville Adventure Park. Appellant.
William Kantz, consultant for Nashville Adventure Park.
Does anyone else in the room wish to introduce themselves? This time, okay. With that, I will turn it over to Nikki, and she will summarize for everyone in the room the responsibility of this board.
Sure. The role of the board today, as set forth in the Metro Code, is to determine whether the solicitation or award was done in accordance with applicable law and the terms and conditions of the solicitation. Applicable law includes the Constitution, statutes, procurement code, and procurement regulations. The board reviews the record and relevant information to determine whether the evidence establishes that the award or solicitation was in accordance with applicable law. If the board determines that the award was in accordance with applicable law, the board can uphold the decision of the purchasing agent. If the board determines that the award was not in accordance with applicable law, the board can modify the decision of the purchasing agent and remand the matter to the purchasing agent with further directions.
Okay. Nancy, did that address your question?
I just want people to be clear on what our authority is today.
Okay. Okay. With that, we will move into the presentations.
I have a question. You asked
Okay.
for questions earlier?
Does it have to do with this procedure?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The reason I asked for the attendees, especially Mr. Zach Kelly, is that he is officially designated as Public Records Request Coordinator for your department and the different divisions within your department. We had made numerous requests for documentation that we felt were unfulfilled and not responded to in writing. At the last letter that was sent to us setting this meeting, prior to that last letter, we had again requested the documentation and requested a meeting before the hearing date was set. We got no response other than, here are the dates you have, take one. With an additional caveat added to that from Ms. Judy Camplin that the request for documentation was being forwarded to the Metro Clerk's office. I want you all to know that the Metro Clerk's office is not responsible for your documents. That is the responsibility of Mr. Zach Kelly. So before this board now, I'm officially going to ask Mr. Zach Kelly or whoever is in his stead to provide us those documents, okay? And I will show you, as is required by the law, my driver's license and my passport, if that is necessary. So again, I will say that we have not been provided, and Ms. Ecke should be familiar with that, the documentation that we need to properly prepare for this appeal. And that's my driver's license.
I think this question is
Well-
for you,
Now,
Nikki.
the second question I have, so this is for all of you at the board.
Okay.
If you may please, if I may, pass that out to everybody. you want to write my driver's license down on your document, it's 44345498. All right. Now,
Did you say a second question?
secondly, at the hearing for the purchasing agent, all the members of the selection committee were present except for Mr. Bailey. We expected all of them to be present today. I think there are only 2 present today. That is not acceptable to us either, because we have questions for them as well. Okay, so we are officially attending this meeting under a heavy protest because we don't believe we've been given our due process to properly prepare for this very, very important hearing for a very, very important project for Metro.
Okay, I would like to choose, Nikki, I think both of these really belong to you in terms of from a legal perspective. I just want to make sure we're.
I will add that, I may add, if I may add to that, we have to get the policy for your records request procedure from the Metro clerk. It was not provided by anybody in your office.
Okay, in general, let me state that, first of all, under the public records law, a public record request must be sufficiently detailed to enable the custodian to identify the records sought. A government entity is not required to sort through files to compile information or to create a document that does not exist. It's my understanding, based on the filings that have been made in this case, that the appellant propounded interrogatories, and inside those interrogatories we had requests for documents. It's also my understanding, as indicated in the documents provided by the appellant, that the appellant received 1,000 or more pages of documents from the procurement division to whom these requests were propounded. Let me state that there is no authority for an appealing party to propound interrogatories in this process. So interrogatories are not part of this process. That is part of general litigation, but not part of this administrative process. Really, what is before this board today is whether relevant documents are not documents that are directly relevant to this procurement have been provided to the appellant. And it's my understanding that documents have been provided to the appellant, and the purchasing division may want to speak, will be the one to speak to the documents that they provided in response to the request for documents propounded by the appellant.
Okay, and then on the second matter, in terms of the members, I'll give you.
I need to respond.
Can I just give you? I just want to jump in here and do
I want to
this.
respond first to that.
I want to address item 2 first, which are the members of the selection committee. As far as I know, Nikki, because I'd like to just clear both of these up with you. As far as I know, there is no requirement that members of the RFP selection committee be in attendance at this hearing.
Correct. There is no requirement
There's
that
not a
members of the
requirement.
committee be present at this hearing.
Okay. I just
It's
wanted to take
entirely
care of
up
both
to
of
the
those.
committee members whether they choose to attend or not. The role of the board is essentially to consider this procurement record and determine whether the award was done in accordance with applicable law. It's a pretty narrow mandate that the board has been given under the code.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to take both questions, so I will just
Let me.
I'll come back to your follow-up question, and then I think we'll be moving into the more formal presentations. But I do want to give you an opportunity to ask your questions.
Okay, so let me respond to Ms. Ecke's response to mine. In the procurement policy and procedure code, there is a requirement to provide documents to the appealing party. I don't have the exact section, but if you'll show that to me, I can point it out to you exactly where that is. So the requirement is in your own code to provide the documents that are requested. Number two, we made a detailed listing of all the documents we wanted, and we just didn't put it out there broadcasting. We reviewed the 1,000 pages of documents that were submitted, and out of those 1,000 pages, there were many documents that were emailed that said, see the attachment. None of the attachments were in any of the documents that we were able to find. So we, after reviewing those, we're not making this request just in order to make the request. We have a need to be properly prepared, to know how this process went forward. And we believe that there are documents that are still out there that we have not seen that would help us prepare for this case. So if you are telling me that the 1,000 pages of documents that were provided are all the documents that you have that pertain to this case, I would request that in writing from Ms. Hickey and from Mr. Zach Kelly and from Ms. Terry Troop, who actually provided the documents at the behest of Mr. Kelly, I think. Okay. So I would request that. Now, with that in light, given that and given the fact that not even half of the selection committee is here, I don't really see any need to go forward with this thing, because we have no way of asking the selection committee members who made this selection any questions about how they made the selection and what the process was.
Well, let me be clear about, I walked through the procedure today. That opportunity for you to make a presentation was not an opportunity to quiz the evaluation committee. It was for you to present facts as to why you believed something to be not valid in the procurement process.
Okay. All right. That's fine. We'll move forward, and I'll address that at a later time, because I believe that the way this procurement process was set up, being a consensus vote, it is key that those members be present, because it was done by consensus, and there's nobody here to answer to me how the consensus was reached.
Okay. Do any of the board members have any comments or questions? Are you guys ready to proceed?
I'm ready to proceed.
Okay. I have a timekeeper back here in the back, and again, we have time limits today. The first portion is, again, limited to 40 minutes, and it's a presentation by the purchasing agent. As noted in the introductions, Michelle Lane is currently the purchasing agent, but she was not involved in the selection or the protest hearing. So based upon legal's advice, we have invited Mr. Gossage in to walk through the determination that he made during the protest. So he will be presenting the results of his hearing to this board today. Okay. Anything I need to add to that, Nikki?
No.
Okay. So, Mr. Gossage, turn it over to you. And Nikki, Christina's going to give me a warning if you start getting close to the 40 minutes. And just as a reminder, we're asking that as individuals make their presentations, that they not be interrupted and they have an opportunity to present any facts. So if you think that you may have a rebuttal to anything that's said, be sure to take notes so that you can address that during your remarks. Mr. Gossage.
I was told that my attendance today at the Bills Board was mandatory. I'm not here because I believe in this development. I'm here because I believe in the procurement process, and am confident that the procurement staff and evaluation committee complied with the procurement process as defined in the TCA, the Metropolitan Code, Title VI Procurement Code, the procurement regulations, and the solicitation documents. There has been significant effort made by parties to reframe the procurement in support of different policy outcomes for this property. The procurement process did not yield a development. It selected the best developer. But because the appellant, the media they contacted, subsequent supporters have challenged those policy decisions using the procurement process.
So it's important to step back and understand how the procurement originated, the actions, rules, and limitations of the procurement staff that they confronted, and how the protest was considered. During my 12 years as a purchasing agent, as previously discussed, it is the role of the appeals board to consider the options available to the purchasing agent, his or her authority to make the determination, and the determination rendered. Was it in accordance with the Constitution, state law, metropolitan code, regulations, and in the best interests of Metro? I have prepared this response based on that process. The abandoned Greer Stadium resulted in a deteriorating structure that it was becoming a blighted area for the Wedgwood Houston community, the Adventure Science Museum, and Fort Negley. Several public hearings took place to collect input from stakeholders who are interested in the desired property. Those meetings did not involve the procurement staff, but were referenced in the RFP that was issued. I bring this to the board's attention because as the appellant calls for public meetings in his letter of appeal, that activity has already occurred. I was made aware that the procurement would be coming for the redevelopment of the property. This was not unusual. We've been involved in the initial redevelopment of Sobro with the Music City Center, the redevelopment of Germantown with the First Tennessee Ballpark, the redevelopment of Riverfront resulting from the Ascend Amphitheater and related structures. However, more similar to what we're talking about here was procurement's involvement in the Nashville Convention Center redevelopment and the Shelby Park Naval Building redevelopment. Those were all procurement assignments. The reason I reference those projects is because the appellant claims the Division of Purchases has no authority to conduct these solicitations. It is interesting that the appellant did not make that claim when they submitted a proposal for the development of the property. Because the scope of this redevelopment was wide-reaching, the evaluation committee was expanded from the usual 3 to 5 members. It was also very diverse. It involved Metro department members as well as those from the community to ensure that a wide range of stakeholders were involved. The evaluation committee intentionally did not include other developers as the appellant claimed should have been done. Our concern was not about what developers think, but it was about what do those key stakeholders from the affected community who were evaluating those proposals. Again, Parks and Recreation, Planning, Finance, the Mayor's Office all had representatives. Outside of Metro, it also involved on the evaluation committee individuals who were associated with Friends of Fort Negley, the Wedgwood Houston neighborhood, and a local African American church. The appellant challenged the qualifications of the evaluation committee in the protest hearing. I found them to be very informed, engaged, and involved in the evaluation discussions. The solicitation process included, as do all solicitations, an online question feature. All potential suppliers can see what others are asking. Those questions are forwarded to the responsible departments to consider and provide responses. The solicitation is then amended and questions and answers provided online. Those responses may not answer specifically what is being asked, and there are many reasons for that. And that was evident in this solicitation. There were questions outside of the procurement. There were questions that don't make sense, questions asked in multiple ways, and were not relevant to the solicitation. The process is transparent and fair as all suppliers see the same set of questions and the answers that are provided. The appellant claims that the questions were not answered or were incomplete. The answers are not intended to satisfy the supplier's interests. They are to provide the direction that is fair to all preparing a proposal based on the exact same information. The RFP circulated through both the Planning and Parks and Recreation Department. This development touched many, so I'm assuming others may have reviewed or offered input into the RFP, but I cannot attest to that. All I can attest to is the involvement of Planning and Parks. The RFP was not how to bring back the stadium, which would have required engineering studies for the structure. The RFP requested how the property would be redeveloped and included a demolition document supporting that approach. The appellant will claim that their request for engineering studies went unanswered. Metro received 5 proposals: B&A Associates, Land Lease Communities, Nashville Adventure Park, One City, the Matthews Group. The appellant will object to the inclusion of the Matthews Group, saying that they did not propose. That is just factually incorrect. They did. The Matthews Group submission included a proposed formation of the Cloud Hill Development Entity, named for the area upon which Fort Negley was built. The formation of a partnership, joint venture, or other business entity is a common practice for large developments and construction projects. I can cite the Convention Center, the ballpark, and multiple others where the proposer was a supplier, and then the entity contracting for that was what they proposed, which was a larger, more involved project. The evaluation committee was convened to consider the proposals. The code, we followed the code, which also follows the Tennessee Code annotated, and it states the following. 4.12.040, competitive sealed proposals, Section D. Receipt of proposals. Proposals shall be open so as to avoid disclosure of any contents to the competing offers during the process of negotiation. A register of proposals shall be prepared and in accordance with the regulations promulgated by the Standards Board and shall be open for public inspection after contract award. This consideration of proposals must be conducted in a manner that prevents disclosure of contents. That can only be conducted in a private manner. If the meetings were publicly conducted, the Metro would have violated state and local laws. The appellant claims that these were secret meetings and should be open to the public for discussion. The evaluation committee received the proposals, read them, met with the rest of the committee and the procurement staff to discuss and conduct a consensus score. The dynamics of this large committee was they discussed the proposals, identified comments about strengths and weaknesses, and quickly culled three offers and shortlisted down to 2 firms, One City and the Matthews Group. Scores followed and were rendered in whole numbers. There was no averaging, no fractional scoring. It was simple whole numbers to support their assessment of shortlisting. The 2 proposals referenced had scores in the 90s. All the others had 70s or below. The appellant questions the process because of the specificity. It was a general consensus scoring that followed the discussions, and it was done in simple whole numbers, scores ranging the top 2 in 90s, the bottom one 70s or below. The only fractional scores came from the Business Assistance Office, BAO, related to the diversity plan. The total available points for the diversity plan were 5 out of 100 total points in the evaluation criteria. The BAO considers all diversity plans against a rubric they have been using for several years. None of the proposals received the full 5 points for this criterion. The appellant questioned the objectivity and concluding points because the principal owner of this project was himself a minority. In the protest, Brian Gleason of the BAO stated that they scored the plan not on business ownership. They followed the solicitation document which said the diversity plan. There's a difference between those two. The evaluation committee included parks, planning, finance, mayor's office, faith-based organizations, Wedgwood Houston Community, the Friends of Fort Negley, and the procurement staff, of course, was involved. The solicitation was managed by a non-voting staff member and the manager of the Business Assistance Office, who reviewed only the diversity plan. The appellant questioned the involvement of BAO. However, as a section within the Division of Purchases, their involvement is unnecessary to defend. They are part of the division. The discussions with the 2 shortlisted firms was challenged on 2 fronts. Again, the appellant raised the issue of secret meetings, and then they questioned the ability to discuss only 2 firms in having discussions. The code speaks to that. In 4.12.040, competitive sealed proposals, Section F, discussion with responsible offers and revisions to proposals. As provided in the request for proposals and under the regulations promulgated by the Standards Board, discussions may be, they don't have to be, but may be conducted with responsible offers who submit proposals determined to be reasonably susceptible of being selected for award. For the purpose of clarification and to assure understanding of and responsiveness to the solicitation requirements. It goes on to say that in conducting the discussions, there shall be no disclosure of any information derived from the proposals submitted by the competing offerers. Those discussions, again, had to be conducted in a private manner and could only take place with the 2 firms determined to be reasonably susceptible of being selected for award. The appellants claim that secrecy and the demand for all offerers to have a part in the discussions is without basis and would violate state law, local law. An intent to award was made, and the appellant filed a timely protest based on the background issues that I've just discussed and introduced nearly 100 interrogatories. The protest hearing is an administrative hearing, not a legal filing. As a result, the appellant was informed verbally that I would address only those issues that fall under the purchasing agent's authority to resolve. Additionally, questions for discovery would not be entertained. The appellant demanded then and demands now that all those questions be answered. Under the advice of legal, I did not provide those answers to all those interrogatories. As with all protests, I read the opening description of the process, much as you've done today, Talia. One line of that description was that the discussions needed to be on point and brevity was preferable to prolonged debate. The appellant protested that this information was not provided prior to the hearing and then asked how long they had to speak. The response was that generally presentations lasted about 20 minutes, and that again was met with complaints. While the appellant will claim that they were limited to only 20 minutes, the presentation ran for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Their presentation ran for 1 hour and 15 minutes, and then they concluded it. Throughout the presentation, instead of articulating the issues I previously summarized, the appellant continually introduced new or reintroduced old interrogatories that were outside the procurement process. He demanded to know how the status of the process related to the Parks Board approval vote, the council's approval vote, a determination of the property as being in surplus. He rejected the response that those were not issues of a procurement, but rather of timing. All necessary steps would have to take place. The appellant demanded that engineering, archaeological surveys, and historical studies all be presented. They were again told that these were outside of the procurement process, which was to select a developer that was in the best interest of Metro. Many of these issues would be resolved in the contracting process, which was stayed with the filing of the protest, to which the appellant claimed that the stay had not been implemented and that the mayor had met with the Matthews Group to discuss the contract. I have no idea what the subject matter was or if the meeting ever took place. The fact that the Division of Purchases, as defined by the code, is the central contracting office, they, along with the Parks and Planning departments, had not begun the negotiations. That argument was rejected by the appellant. Throughout the protest, the appellant demanded answers and was repeatedly told that they needed to make their case, and once concluded, I would allow the Matthews Group to speak if they desired, and that I would ask questions of all parties for the purpose of reaching the determination. The appellant is reframing that response as a promise to answer all his questions. The protest is not another opportunity for discovery, but an opportunity for the protesting firm to present how the process erred in following the TCA, the MCL, regulations, or the solicitation itself. The appellant presented inadequate protest claims to show how the process failed to satisfy those requirements. As is my standard practice, at the conclusion of the protest, I asked the evaluation committee members who were present, and as pointed out, they were all there but one, if they had heard anything during the protest that gave them concern in their scoring of the proposals. They unanimously responded that they did not see any reason to change their scores. There have been protest hearings where one member would indicate they had reservations, and we would discuss those before ever rendering a decision. We've even reversed decisions or upheld the protest as a result of those. The action was framed, that action of asking the evaluation committee has been framed by the appellant as being disingenuous. The closing observation I made was that the purchasing agent could only consider those claims over which the purchasing agent has authority as defined in the charter, code, and regulations. Those claims were not sufficient to uphold the protest and overcome the point differential between the second and third ranked proposals. They certainly did not overcome the top scoring developer, to which the appellant, remarked that they were not trying to overcome the scoring gap. With no procurement violation of the TCA, the MCL, regulations, or the solicitation documents, and no closure of the scoring differential, there was no basis for the claims, nor authority would be given to the purchasing agent to uphold the protest, so it was dismissed. The appellant continued their argumentative style and demanded that they be able to rebut the claims. Since the claims were nothing more than a declaration of what they had already stated, there was no reason to have that. And the continued argumentative style continued in attempts to intimidate and control the narrative. The process had exhausted the normal course of discussions, and continued arguments would result only in more baseless, inflamed accusations. The meeting was concluded. You're fully aware of the actions that the appellant has made that have occurred subsequent to the protest termination, and have attempted to continually reframe the issue. Those actions played no part in my determination, but reinforced the wisdom of the evaluation committee that the selection of the Matthews Group as the developer was and is in the best interest of Metro. The wisdom of the policy to develop is a different debate, and again, outside of the role of the Division of Purchases and the purchasing agent.
Thank you. We will now move to your presentation. So I would like to, are you ready, Christina?
Yes.
You will have the same.
I need a minute because I got to review
Okay.
what Mr. Gossett said.
Okay, we'll give you just a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And do keep in mind that you'll have an opportunity, he'll have an opportunity to respond, and you'll have the final word, if you will.
I had
Need some more water, Talia? Kelly, you want some water?
Okay.
I wish it wasn't the first.
Okay. Are you ready? Okay. And I really want to say your name correctly. Is it Sandhu?
Devinder.
Okay. I
Sandhu.
just want to be I've got an odd name too, so I have to.
Not as odd. More odd than mine, yes.
Okay.
But that's okay. I understand and I sympathize with you.
Okay. So I'll turn it over to you right now for your presentation.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Devinder Sandhu with Nashville Adventure Park. I want to go on record as saying that I am not opposed to the selection of the Matthews Group as a developer for this project. I consider them to be friends, and I know that they do wonderful work. I am, however, quite disturbed by the procurement process and the selection methodology. I understand that Mr. Gossett had said that the selection process was not to select a development, but a developer. But if you look at the RFQ, it is asking for detailed plans and financial considerations. It's asking for qualifications and experience, which is a lot to ask for people if you're only looking for a developer. I know the Matthews Group spend a lot of time and money. They have it. I spend a lot less because I don't have it. I'm an engineer who was brought into this. I had given up on the development of the Greer Stadium Park as a recreation facility in my discussions with the Metro Parks when I was told by Metro Parks that the mayor had decided to open that up to developers. As an engineer, I felt I was not qualified to be a developer, so I had pulled out of the process. However, before the process was set to begin, I was approached by some friends who were developers, and they had a grand vision. So we actually met with officials within Metro government. I won't say who, but we were told, great, give us your best plan. We want to see the best plan we can for that site. And that is what we did. Now, Mr. Gossett has, and I don't really appreciate that, baseless and inflamed accusations. I have never made baseless or inflamed accusations, Mr. Gossett, and I don't appreciate that. There are other people who submitted on this who are also friends of mine, and I don't consider them to be inadequate at doing development. Now, I'll go back to my questions earlier about Zach Kelly being the keeper of the records and the books and not giving me any response since the days of our initial hearing on what the procedure was for getting these records and what detail I had to provide on getting these records. And I will reiterate again that without those records, I do not feel that I can properly assess this selection process. Because I feel that in those records, there has to be some way that the 7 selection committee members came up with a number to rank all of us. And I'll read you the numbers, and they are fractional. They're not whole numbers, as Mr. Gossett stated. They are fractional numbers. At the bottom of the list was B&A Associates with 65.25. And next to last, it's us, 70.00, Nashville Adventure Park. Third place was Lend-Lease Communities, LLC, 71.50. So we're the laggards. Up at the top in second place was One City with 92.25. And then the Matthews Group with an almost perfect score of 96. Now, this perfection was reached because they got the highest points in the diversity plan, which was 3 out of 5. In their financial considerations, they achieved a perfect score of 30 out of 30, something that, given the nebulous nature of this proposal, I find it hard to believe. And the justification says, appears to be fully funded. Again, they either are or they're not. Now, when there are no documents required to be showing what your funding sources are, how can you get a 30 out of 30 on that? In the detailed plan, they got 24 out of 25. Almost a perfect score. In their details, many things were left out. I like their plan. I think they had a very nice plan. But there were a lot of details that were left out that would have suggested to me this is not a perfect score. Like, for example, where's all the parking? Where is really all the green space that you're claiming? Where are you going to put all these buildings? Those details were not there. We provided a lot of detail on ours, including numbers. Another score that they got, perfection, was experience, 20 out of 20. The Matthews Group deserves a 20 out of 20. They have done a lot of great work. Cloud Hill Partnership is an entity that does not exist. Cloud Hill Partnership is the entity that submitted the proposal. The RFQ said that the submitting entity had to be listed on the proposal along with the RFQ number. The Matthews Group was not listed. So to give the presenting authority entity 20 out of 20 when they don't exist, again, calls into question at how was this done. Now, when Mr. Gossage in my protest hearing asked me, Mr. Sandhu, what experience does Nashville Adventure Park have? I responded, Mr. Gossage, we don't have any experience. We were formed specifically for this RFQ. However, but then he cut me off, and he asked Mr. Matthews what experience they had. And of course, they were able to reiterate and call out all the great projects that they have done for our fine city over the years. And again, I will say to this board and to Mr. Matthews that I'm very proud of his accomplishments. I'm very proud of the accomplishments he has done for our city and the service he has provided to our city. not only to make money for himself, but also as a benefactor of many charitable organizations and groups to benefit underprivileged youth, senior citizens, people with health issues, and so on. So I wish I could do half the things that Mr. Matthews does. However, on the experience side, on our team, which Mr. Goss has refused to allow me to add, was Jaretana. I think you guys have heard of Tony Jaretana. He's building the largest building in downtown right now. He actually helped with the Matthews family revitalize downtown when everybody was saying it's crazy to have people living downtown. That was Tony Jaretana, who's on our group. We also have the Holiday Properties and Holiday Construction. They're the ones who are building the huge complex out on the east side of the airport right now. They're also the ones who refurbished the Tennessee Department of Transportation Vehicle Maintenance Center on Charlotte Avenue, right across from the Red Cross. They also refurbished and won awards for building the Sawtooth Building on Lindell Avenue, very close to the WeHo neighborhood. So these are, and then we also have Roger Ligon of IFC Builders, who's a minority builder, who has done a lot in the last 45 to 50 years to build churches, retirement communities, athletic facilities, apartment complexes, condominiums, and houses in North Nashville and West Nashville. So to say that we have no experience and to give us the points on those experience of 12, I think begs a question that this is something else that got wrong. On the diversity plan, which is really what started me on this protest path and appeal path, I'm the only minority that submitted. I am the only minority that submitted. I'm an Asian African. I was born in East Africa in Kenya. My ancestors came from India to help the British build a railroad. So in Kenya, we were considered second-class citizens to the British. We came over here and we thought we'd have equal opportunity, and I will say that we have had a great opportunity. I've gotten a great education, I've made great friends, and this was my first attempt to have a procurement in Nashville, Davidson County, and I'm disappointed. Because in the diversity plan, which was written by Don Harden, who actually has recused himself from our group when I went to the appeal because he's on one of your other boards in procurement. So Don Harden wrote our diversity plan. And Don Harden graded 4 out of 5. The guy who helped Metro with the diversity plan procedure could not come up with one that would pass muster. So if that was wrong, and me as a minority doesn't count in the so-called matrix or so-called grading, then when are minorities ever going to get a chance to move forward in this town? If all that counts is how are the minorities going to be paid, how many minorities are you going to have, and so on, anybody can write that. But we're at a 2% minority participation in this town. That is shameful. Absolutely shameful. This procurement asks for 20%. So if we're required to have 20% minority participation, we should all be getting perfect scores, because all this is looking for a developer, and you can hold our feet to the fire to say that you better have 20% procurement or you're going to be paying fines. Okay? And we committed ourselves to have 20% procurement, and if you look at the pictures on our team, you will see we have across the board diversity. Much more so than any of the other people who submitted. What's my time? That's all? I got left or I got to go? How many did he use? How many? 24. You used 24? I don't have much more to say.
Okay, what about these things?
So that was actually my introduction. I've got a real short statement to make after that. Again, I want to tell you, and I want Ms. Hickey to underline that we're appearing under protest because we feel that we've not been supplied the documentation that we need to properly prepare, especially the so-called consensus scoring. Has not been properly explained to me. Neither has the matrix for the diversity plan been explained to me, however that was achieved, and so on. So Nashville Adventure Park is hereby appealing all decisions made to conduct the sale or lease of the Greer Stadium Fort Negley property under the grounds that the flawed process, inconsistent specifications, other ambiguities serve as a basis for this appeal. Nashville Adventure Park believes the solicitation for the RFQ and the awarding of this RFQ is not in accordance with Metro Code and regulations, despite the opinion of Mr. Gossage. Metro Legal has not provided a definitive written response to this question from the Metro Council. Nashville Adventure Park appeals this RFQ on the fact that the terms and conditions of the solicitation are ambiguous, the scoring was administered incorrectly and arbitrarily, and a matter not permitted on the very own terms of the RFQ. Mr. Gossett said that the Metro Procurement has the authority to administer sale or lease of real property, real estate, as provided in the procurement regulations, but we believe that it does not, because nowhere in the procurement regulations does it mention real property or real estate. It talks about other types of property. So that is a gray area that maybe needs to be addressed or corrected, that if you have the authority to do real estate, then that should be put in your code. So based on all this, we request that the Procurement Appeals Board repeal, rescind, and cancel the RFQ 969-636 in its entirety. We request this process start over, be done correctly in a manner that follows codes that is not secretive, and includes the Metro Council, Metro Properties, and the Metro Tax Assessor, as well as provide for input from stakeholders and the public. I'm not saying the public has to be involved in the selection process, but I strongly believe that they should be allowed to see the documents that are presented and provide input for a project of this immensity for this town. Now, we say that the gaps, these so-called scoring gaps, are artificial and they're arbitrary. So we're not asking for a reduction in the gap to make us more competitive. We believe that the scoring, again, was not done properly. And this is based on the fact that no appraisal was given to the committee or to the members of procurement until much later in the process. It was an afterthought. Let us do an appraisal. And I think I have a copy of a bill that was sent to Metro Properties of $9,600 dated May 3rd, 2017 for an appraisal. This should have been done way before the process started, which means there was an afterthought. Because how do you evaluate what the financial aspects or considerations are of a property when you don't even know how much the property is worth and what you're getting for it in return? It's unfair to the Matthews Group, it's unfair to one city, and it's certainly unfair to us. There was no mention of how much park space was needed or required. This is a park property. Everybody wants it to be a park. But there wasn't anything in the RFQ to say, we got to maintain so much park space. So everybody had to come up with their own idea of what the public would want. Well, the public wants it all to be park, if you've heard lately. And we agree. I agree with that. I was forced into doing this development because it was supposed to be going to developers. I wanted a park for recreation for the public. Now, we were also told that there wasn't any archaeological study, and there wasn't any reason for the proposers to have one, that this was outside the scope. Well, subsequently, we found out that 2 previous archaeological studies had been done, one in 1993 and one in 2004. And we don't know how many other private ones had been done. Why did procurement not have this and provide this to us? It didn't take us long to find those. There wasn't a survey done of what property is to be in this RFQ. There are actually 2 parcels that the Greer Stadium property encompasses. One is the stadium and a little bit of parking around it. And those of you who've been up there, the second part is that big raw piece of parking area to the north of the stadium. That is actually part of the property that's part of Fort Negley and leased by Adventure Science Center. That is not officially part of the Greer Stadium property or Greer Stadium parcel. So because of that, how can that be, because we don't have a survey that shows exactly where this parcel is, how can that be an accurate representation? There's another parcel of property to the north of this subject site that is actually owned by a private individual, but there are a couple of parcels that are owned by Metro within that. And if you don't look at it very closely, like the Matthews Group unfortunately didn't, they put some of their development on this private individual's property. So if the detail of the plan got 24 out of 25 and they missed that part, I think that's a pretty big detail that you put in your development of somebody else's property. I don't understand that Mr. Gleason was the one who was tasked with providing the diversity score when it's not in the RFQ. The RFQ never said that somebody else would be, unless I missed it, that somebody else would be providing the 5 points of the scoring system. I want to say that because these statements I'm making are to show you that the process is flawed. The scoring system is not correct. The scoring system does not have a basis to score from. Metro is going to lose value with anybody's proposal because we're not properly evaluating what you and I own together. I was also explained to me that the financial considerations were done by the finance department. And nobody within the evaluation committee had any idea what that score was going to be. This also, I don't think, was in the RFQ process on how the scoring was going to be done. And who within the finance department provided the scoring? And how were they tasked to do that? When there was no requirement for providing a detailed financial plan or any documentation on where the funding was. Again, 30 out of 30 for Matthews Group, 28 out of 30 for one city, and we're at 20 out of 30. We were fully funded. Nobody asked us that. It was in our documentation. Nobody looked at that. We were fully funded. So if there are no scoring cards, how can the score be given or be validated? Where's the scoring information? There's no emails, there are no notes, there's no tabulations, there are no ballot sheets, there are no calculations, there are no questions from any of the evaluations or selection committee members to anybody in our documentation that were given to us. In the 1,000 pages, none of that information is there. So how am I supposed to determine if this scoring was done fairly? How can you determine that? How can the public determine that? When you have scores that range from 65.25 to 96.00, when your significant figures go to 2 digits, that means that there was some scoring going on from mathematics. Anybody in mathematics will tell you that. There's something going on there. That there's more to this than just consensus. Consensus would be ranking 1, 2, 3, and 4. Not give a score of 96. One of the questions we asked was number 51, if you want to look at it in our request for documentation. And the response to that was Terry Troop did collect the consensus scores and entered them into the report. So I don't know what Ms. Troop received. We never got a copy of what she received in our request for documentations. And we would like to have those, and I think you should have those also. Now, how many minutes I have now?
16.19.
Left? I'm almost done. Now, if the RFQ did not call for a funding letter, how can this be used to contribute to the score or evaluate one proposer over another? To be awarded full points, 100%, for appearing to be fully funded does not seem to me to be correct or right or fair or equitable. We were fully funded, and we ended up with 20 points. We did not appear to be. We were. We had documentation to show that. The housing units was something else that came up, but there wasn't any idea of how many housing units a mayor or the city wanted. So everybody came up with their own idea of what those housing unit numbers should be. We knew that there was supposed to be affordable workplace housing. So we came up with those numbers. So now you're comparing everybody's different ideas instead of saying we want such a percentage of housing to be affordable, such a percentage to be workplace, such a percentage to be for the general public. That would have been a more equitable way of asking this question for this site, especially if you're asking for a detailed plan. Because I don't think this was just a request to select a developer. This was to get a baseline for what your development would look like, but at least put us all on the same basis. You know, if I'm going to supply you pencils, or I'm going to build a wastewater treatment plant that's going to provide me this kind of discharge, then I know what I have to do and what the costs are associated with that. That's for you. Mr. Potter. I have a beef with you later.
Lovely.
One other item was the view sheds. We were supposed to protect the view sheds for Fort Negley. Nobody could tell us what the view sheds were. Procurement couldn't. Friends of Fort Negley couldn't. Historic Commission couldn't. The Confederate Sons of the Confederacy who were up there could, or the Sons of the Union. Nobody knew what the view sheds were until much later in our process. Again, I want to say, and I want to reiterate, that with all these inconsistencies and gray areas, how do you come up with a score? How do you come up with a score with all these gray areas? I was going to, well, maybe I'll say it. I'm looking at Bert.
Keep going. You have to take time.
I'm not going to say it. I'm going to leave Bert out of this.
Thank you.
I will say, however, that the Cloud Hill Partnership reserved their name the day after we pointed it out in our hearing with Mr. Gossage. They went to the Secretary of State and reserved their name because I was going to try to reserve the name before they got there, but we decided not to do that. So the RFQ states a developer will be selected based on the RFQ criteria. So if this is true, why was a matrix scoring used? Why were people involved in the process that were beyond the committee? why was consensus scoring used at all in such a complicated and large development for metros? All this points to a scoring system that nobody is accountable for. Who is accountable for the scoring system? Is it the mayor's office? Is it Ms. Talia Lomax O'Neill? Did I say that correctly? Close enough. Is it Mr. Gossage in procurement? Is it the park board? It's their property. Who is accountable for the scoring system? I haven't found anybody who'll step up and say who is. Costs were used in development, unknown consensus score, unknown cost score, unknown matrix score. All that leads to unknown evaluation. The members who were selected for this committee said, I will maintain my independence in this evaluation. If they're maintaining their independence in this evaluation, but then they're asked to join a consensus, where is that independence? And that's in the secret document that they signed. I keep saying secret, I know it wasn't, but I think it was. So it's in the document, in the review board agreement, that says that I will maintain my independence. So if there to be independent scoring, why a consensus score? Why were the cost scores not permitted to be seen or reviewed, or the matrix scoring from the BAO office not allowed to be seen or commented on? Those were numbers they were forced to accept. I think they should have been given a chance to ask the question, why is there perfection here? Why 96 out of 100? Why 92.25 out of 100 for the number 1 and 2 proposers? And then why does it drop off so drastically after that when there's not much difference in detail of the plan, in experience, in qualifications? Why? Mr. Gossett said that the consensus score was captured without explaining from where. So unless there's documentation that supports these tabulations, it's not possible to verify the end result, especially with these meetings being held in secret or without the sunshine on them. If these scores were never collected or provided by the committee members, then how is a score given at all? So that is what we're asking for. How can we come to these numbers when no scoring system was kept? And then finally, this developer, whoever is selected, once a picture is shown and the public hears from it, Metro Council has a chance to go talk about it, changes are made. So what's finally developed may be completely different from what was presented. So again, I ask you, why put us through this ordeal of providing a detailed plan? Why make us go through this expense of showing what can be done at that site when all you really want was qualifications? All you want to do is find the best qualified developer. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. At this time, we are scheduled to go back to the purchasing agent to.
I think we're scheduled for a break.
I think people want a break.
We did have a scheduled 5-minute break, didn't we?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. And when we return, the purchasing agent will begin his rebuttal and remarks. The second presentation by the purchasing agent. Well, he will have an opportunity to respond to anything that he heard earlier. And this portion of the presentation is limited to 30 minutes. And again, we have a timekeeper that will keep us on schedule. So, Mr. Gossage, I'm going to go back to you. If you would begin.
First, I'm kind of taking these in the order they were presented. The points, the evaluation committee evaluated the detailed plan, the experience, qualifications, and financial considerations, all in whole numbers, just as I'd said. The only fractional points were in the diversity plan, where they were looking at 5 available points, and that was done by BAO, as is the standard practice. BAO is a part of procurement. They don't have to be explained as being in the division. There are questions about how the scores were captured. I can't show you the spreadsheet because the spreadsheet would be on the wall. It would just shine up there. It looks exactly like this piece. As the discussion takes place, and several of you have been on evaluation committees, as the group discusses the issues, they assign a point and it's keyed in. All you're seeing here is the output, the printout of the spreadsheet that was on the wall in the room where they were doing the consensus scoring. There are no notes. There are no fractional scores submitted. There is nothing to do. So as there is an accusation that the numbers are somehow handled mysteriously in the thing, it's just factually untrue. It is a discussion and scores are captured. The only fractional numbers are those submitted by BAO. In this case, they received 3 points out of 2 points. Was it 2 or 3?
3.
3 points out of 5.
I'm sorry, 3 points for Matthews.
Okay, and 2 points for?
Yes.
2 points for Adventure Science Museum, Nashville Park. Had they received all points, the score would only have closed to a 96 point for Matthews and 93 for them. It doesn't change the outcome. I really don't care what the view is of how the scores took place. We're conveying the truth, and I'll let it stand at that. The supplier issue came up. It is a matter of record. You can look in the system. The Matthews Group submitted the proposal. The proposal included the formation of Cloud Hill as a developer package. That's not inconsistent with any other proposal that we have seen on this magnitude for developments. That's a standard practice. As far as the minority discussion, once again, as was described in the protest hearing and described in my statement, the business ownership is irrelevant. It is the plan submitted, and that is what is scored by the rubric. It was stated in the procurement that way as well, and went through in detail what had to be in the plan, and it was scored against that. As far as the minority ownership that's being claimed, the appellant is not an approved minority. Regardless of what his personal ethnicity is, he is not an approved a minority. So if that had been the criteria, he would have gotten no points. But that was not the criteria. The criteria was the plan. This was a proposal. So the size and location of the park was something that had to be worked into the entire mesh. And the evaluation committee discussed that at length, not only the size, but the location and how it presented entrance and egress into the property. How did it affect how the Adventure Science Museum was viewed from the street? They didn't know what would be proposed. There was discussion prior to it being released that the street access was probably the most favorable for a commercial aspect. But they would really like to see how that was going to be approached. And so this was a proposal. The same thing for the number of homes that would be there. This is all about the developer coming together with this mix that they were proposing. They were looking for not only the qualifications, but they were looking for the vision and the potential for what's going to take place. As far as the secrecy thing, I'm really could care less about how that is being phrased. The Sunshine Law, if they want to participate and have a Sunshine Law, Florida is a good place to go for that. Tennessee states how the evaluation is to be done. It is to be done in such a way that no information is disclosed on the competition. Do you have anything else you want to? Is there anything else you thought needed to be addressed? Okay, and then on the BAO, I'm going to revisit that, where the diversity plan was scored. There is a need to have a consistency, not to have everyone just weigh in on what it is, but a consistency on each diversity plan that is permitted on subsequent proposals. So it's important that that be a standardized process. And one person does that. That has always been the practice. It is not necessary under the code or in the regs or under the state law to disclose who is scoring what part of an evaluation. So while that was questioned as well, it's just not a requirement. With that, I'm going to let my comments stand, and I'll yield the time back to the board, and you can ask questions if you'd like additional clarifications.
Mr. Sanju? Okay. Are you ready?
You have no questions for her?
The board will ask its questions after all parties have presented. So if you'll tell us when you're ready, she'll begin. Okay.
Just a minute.
Okay.
Hold on. Okay. Devinder Sandhu again with National Adventure Park. Let me thank you for bearing with me on this. I know this is not easy, and I don't relish being a bad guy in this town causing problems for the well-oiled machine of Metro government. But I think it's not that well-oiled at times. We have issues. And some of the statements Mr. Gossage made just now lead me to reinforce my opinion that there are problems with procurement and how this machine of Metro government works. If he doesn't care about how the scoring is done, as long as it's done by the so-called procurement code and it's always been that way, there's a problem if it's always been that way. That is why we have 2% participation from minority companies in this town. We have a 2% participation because many of them are not qualified or choose not to participate because of this process, because they're not going to get a fair shake. Because I'm looking across the table and I see women and minorities who would be considered as part of the disadvantaged business enterprise group. I don't know how many of you guys are registered as a minority group, but it doesn't take long to do it. Nashville Adventure Park was in the process of applying for minority status. Why? Because I am a minority. And I can apply for that. Similarly, if you use a logic that Mr. Gossi just said, that I'm not a minority so shouldn't be considered, I'm not an entity, then neither is Cloud Hill Partnership. They're not an entity. Why are they considered? It's just a group. People have said they could do something. What assurances we have that they can do it, other than Matthew standing behind them? So I don't know the logic of that statement. And it disturbs me that he would make that statement, that there's nobody accountable, that it's, if you put numbers up on the board, you wouldn't see anything, you see a blank sheet. Somebody's entering numbers. Nobody kept a record of who scored a 1. A 96 is a number. I didn't like getting 70s in college or in high school or elementary school. That's a failure. That's what I got. A 96 is a good number. You mean you did a good job. But you were given a test that you could answer questions to get that 96. I got to take a breath after that one. It bothers me. Mr. Goss just said the plan of the proposal was most important and business entity was not important, not that important. That's not what he said at the beginning. He said the plan wasn't that important. They were looking for a developer. That's a contradiction right here within this room. I'll go back to the diversity plan, which led me on this path of standing up against Metro government. And I saw Ms. Lane looking at some kind of score sheet, which has not been provided to us. So I don't know if that's a score sheet for the diversity plan or some kind of matrix. But I would like to see how the one individual who developed those 5 points, which I agree does not close the gap. I'm not about closing the gap. I'm about fairness, about equity, about a system that is available to hold somebody accountable in the selection process. So if that is a score sheet, I would like to see it. And I would like to know who within Metro government.
It's the RFP. It's the RFP.
I just want to make sure that.
There are only 2 documents we've looked at here, RFP and the score sheet, both provided.
Details of how the plan will be scored.
Okay, I just want to make sure you don't have something down there that no one else has access to.
The top page.
So this.
Okay.
So if you had an individual making a determination that I'm worth 2.00 points and one city is worth 1.25 points, do they just, there's no guideline for this person to make that, this one person to make those determinations? Similarly, how does the committee of 7 people come up with a score of 30 for 30 for financial consideration? Again, was done outside the scope of the RFQ and outside the selection committee. So you essentially have 35 points, or one third of this process was outside the selection committee. Is that my gap? Does that 1/3 close my gap? Which is not something I'm asking for, but does that close my gap? If the selection committee had something to say about that, would I have scored higher? If you have all of you read the comments on this scoring sheet?
Yes.
Everybody has seen those. Okay. Those are not exact numbers. Those are opinions. Those are very subjective statements B&S Associates seems out of line with historic relevance. One city, there's a density concern and asks for TIF. This process is flawed. The one city was asking for a TIF. The TIF, at the beginning, that process was said there was not TIF financing involved in this. Yet they were looking for a TIF. They scored 28 out of 30 on their financial consideration. If they're basing their requirement on TIF, then how can they score so much higher than we are? We were fully funded. There was a question that was brought up by some members of the selection committee after their names were released, because I had discussions with some of them. And many of them are not happy with how this process went about. And I encourage all of you on this board, before you make a decision, to call each and every one of those folks and ask them, was there a scoring? How did you come up with the consensus? How did you do this? How did you come up with a 96? How did you come up with a 65.25? I'll leave out the 0.25. How did you come up with a 63? We had in our plan funding for not only Fort Negley to restore the fort, almost $9 million worth that we put in there, but also for capturing revenue for Metro Parks and for Adventure Science Center to help bring more and more people and more of the public to that area to generate revenue towards the development of that area. It seems like none of that was even considered in this plan. We had money to give to the city. We had parkland that we had donated, people who were donating, willing to donate land to help with this development that would go towards the 4,500 acres that Metro Parks is trying to get. We had anywhere from 30 to 300 acres that we were proposing to give to Metro as a gift for developing this site. Where is that evaluation? It's not in here. It wasn't considered. Would that be part of the financial consideration? Would that be part of qualifications? We had a proposal to provide recreation for the kids, indoor soccer, something that Nashville is lagging 20 years behind surrounding communities. We had indoor basketball and volleyball, which is a park board function. This is park property. I wanted more park property. We had the Tennessee State Soccer Association ready to move into the offices. Tennessee State Soccer Association, the largest body of amateur adults and youth soccer players in the state, was ready to move their offices into the Sounds headquarters. That was not considered. They were willing to pay a rent in excess of $70,000 a year for a little bit of that space. That was not considered. We had plans to hold concerts, special games, special events, provide the refurbish that stadium, which is not dilapidated. It is a solid concrete chunk. I'm an engineer. I've seen it. I've been through it. And if it hadn't been allowed to be vandalized, it would have been able to be saved very easily and very quickly. And there are examples of stadia being repurposed and reused for the benefit of the public all over the country and all over the world. That was part of our plan, and that wasn't considered. If I had my druthers, I would have wanted that to be mainly a park plan. But we were forced to do this development, which I think goes against what we need for middle of Metro. We can have development around that park, but I think this plan, as it stands, would take away from the magnificence of Fort Negley. And I did question why we were doing this. When Mr. Gossett said he didn't ask the question about developing this at the beginning. Yes, I did. We asked that question. We asked who came up with this RFQ to develop Metro Park property. And we were never given an answer. It was a group of people, but we were never given an answer exactly who it was and how they came up with this evaluation criteria. There are many developers that I know who said, we're not going to bid on that because we don't know what the hell they're asking. And we don't know how we can make money at it. So let me go back, how many?
1754 left.
Left?
Got plenty of time.
Yeah, you get too much time.
I want everyone to have an opportunity. Right? Get as much time.
So let me go back to Greer Stadium rehabilitation. The only report that was issued, and Metro paid for this, was a demolition plan for Greer Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
There was never a study done to evaluate the building condition report, which is an American Society of Testing Materials format to go evaluate a building and see what value it does have. Recently, we were about to tear down a state building downtown, if you may remember, to make room for a building that could not be developed there. They were going to tear down the state building, and it would have been a loss to our city. It was a historic World War II Art Deco building, and fortunately, we saved that. And the study showed, when they went back and did a proper study on that building, it showed that it could generate a lot of revenue for the city. The lease, one thing about this lease agreement that is proposed for this is that you got to realize that we're putting buildings on this site. It's not going to generate any tax revenue for the citizens of Nashville or for our government. It's going to be leased property with this whatever Metro can agree to pay or get from Cloud Partnership as part of the lease agreement. There are no property tax to be paid. If the property was sold, or a portion of that property was sold, then Metro would realize great revenue. The tax assessor is kind of upset about some of these other lease arrangements that have gone around town, because they figure that they're losing revenue on parcels that have been, or property has been put on those parcels that do not generate revenue for the city. So was that ever considered when the RFQ was put together? The process itself here, this RFQ process does not stand the muster of good financial stewardship of our monies and our properties. I think it needs to be revisited with some professionals looking at it from all aspects before it's put out. This is too valuable a piece of property to be done in such quote, willy-nilly manner. And I apologize if I'm not saying that in a nice way. So which one?
How much time does he have left? 14 minutes left.
Okay. Yeah. We spent a lot of time developing these things, and when I sit here before you guys as people, I don't want you to get bored by all this stuff I'm putting to you. But I want to reiterate that this process was not fair to any of us, not just me. I've been called disgruntled, I've been called dissatisfied, I've been called somebody who's going where you shouldn't be going. But I want you to know that I was wrong about this being my first attempt to deal with Metro. This is my second. My first one, Mr. Potter, was trying to deal with your sludge problem back 20 years ago.
Kind of our sludge problem.
It was our sludge problem. I'm adding a little humor and side note. And I'll talk to you about that later, like I promised. So again, the procurement office did not provide the requested documents to us in a timely manner, and we have now submitted to you officially with my Tennessee's driver's license that we want these documents. And if Mr. Kelly needs a detail of which documents we think are missing, would be guessing, because we don't know what documents were generated. So we'll do our best to do that by going through the 1,000 that were submitted, but I will tell you that there's some that were called attachments to emails that we never saw. We would like to see the thought process on the diversity plan and on the financial considerations, because those were done outside the committee. I would like also to be able to ask questions to the 7 members of the evaluation committee to see if there was any scoring done. And I don't know if I'm allowed to do this after this process or between this process and when you guys get ready to do your stuff. Give us your hearing. Again, we asked for multiple times the rules, including how to get records. Those were not provided us. We were not provided procedures until just before the hearing. And again, we have not been provided documents. We have not gotten a property survey.
It's important you point out this was for the protest hearing that we didn't get those.
That's right.
Because we're appealing the protest hearing.
Right. Now, this is all, again, thank you. This is all things that we asked in the protest hearing that Mr. Gossett says was outside procurement. How can it be outside procurement not to have a property survey, or at least meets and bounds, or exact description of the property when everything depends on that? How can that be a case? How can archaeological reports or any kind of environmental reports that may or may not have been done at least give us that, because it's too important, a project? There was an appraisal done. That wasn't provided. We had to go dig for that. And I referenced that to you, May 23rd, 2007. We have a bill for that, $9,600. That should have been provided so we could properly evaluate the site.
It should be brought to the committee.
And it should have been provided to committees or whoever is doing the financial considerations to know what that property is really worth. What are we giving away as citizens of Nashville? We were told that rehabilitation or renovation of the site means that everything could be torn down and restored back to its original condition or some other condition. Yet, in the engineering field, rehabilitation, renovation actually means fixing up something. I think that's what I've always heard it to be. Restoration means you're restoring it to its original state or something different from what you have. So the terminology there is also wrong. It's misleading to think that Greer Stadium must be demolished because it's decrepit. I'll again repeat, it's not decrepit. It can be repurposed. It can be a great facility for the public to use. You may know that we filed an ethics complaint with the Ethics Commission. You may or may not know that, but we did do that because we felt like we were not getting our we're not getting what we needed to properly prepare for these hearings. And also we thought there was, we think there were conflicts of interest in how some members who selected people on the committee were situated in the public in their, either in their work or in their process of dealing with this selection. The procurement stated that the related questions go far beyond the scope of the procurement process, and those questions outside of the authority of the purchasing agent will not be considered. There was no explanation of why they were not be considered, or how something like providing a survey, or how providing a scoring system, or how providing the expertise of the evaluation committee is beyond the scope of this procurement process. There was no why or how given. I do know that the mayor did meet with the Cloud Hill team on Tuesday, June the 14th, 2017, after we'd filed our protest on June the 5th. And This goes against Metro Code, section 4.36.010F. I did cite something. I'm not used to that. Section 4.36.010F says the process is to come to a halt until the protest can be heard. Seems like that part of the code was not made clear to the mayor's office. And I know Matthew's group would not know about it because they're like me. They don't expect to be versed in the code. There were some other issues. We asked if we should have legal representation at the protest hearing. We didn't realize that Metro Legal would be here representing procurement. If that had been the case, we might have had an attorney or at least somebody who's assisting us with that. That should be in your rules that there always will be an attorney here, but because I wouldn't have known that. There is one. There are a couple of items in this process. We met with Mr. Clay Bailey prior to him being put on the RFQ committee because he knew he was friends with Fort Negley, because we wanted to get information or input from all interested parties. And he gave us some very good discussions and very good input. Now, part of the RFQ committee selection process was if you've been approached by members of the people soliciting, you should inform the people making the selection. I don't know if Mr. Bailey did that. If he did, would that have forced him to recuse himself from being on the committee? We also asked for an audience with Mr. Colby Sledge to discuss with him as a councilman off this area to get his ideas about what he wanted. He refused to meet with us. He refused to meet with us. He said everything's up to the selection committee. Why would a council member representing that community refuse to meet with one of the proposers for one of the biggest projects that's going to go in his district? The RFQ participation was greater on a number of affordable housing units. Yes, this was not a requirement of the RFQ. RFQ participants were greater on appearing to be funded, yet this was not a requirement of the RFQ. Diversity scoring, we have no idea about this matrix system that was used. We'd like to have that back. And again, I consider it almost an insult that Mr. Gossu would say, I don't care what his minority status is. He's not a minority. That really, really, really is upsetting to me, and it should be to you. Especially when I look across this table and I see DBEs all over the place, except for you, Mr. Potter. Experience scoring not accurate. I'll reiterate. I was not allowed in the protest hearing to give the experience of my team, which was a diverse group, including an Indian who's a structural engineer who's listed as a minority, including Don Harden, construction management, who is listed as a minority, including Roger Ligon, IFC Builders, who's listed as a minority. Were these people taken into consideration in the diversity score? They're part of my team. And I only got 4th place. Who else had such diversity on their team? I had women. I had Indians. I even had one guy who's an American Indian who is registering, who's not officially minority, but he is based on his heritage. So paperwork ain't always what it needs to be, because it's obvious that if Cloud Hill Partnership did not have to be an entity, even though it was required that responding party be listed on the top of the RFQ. It wasn't Matthews Group that was there, it was Cloud Hill Partnership. Matthews Group should have been listed on the on the submittal. There's no indication procurement obtained the value of the property that Nashville Adventure Park was considering as payment in its final calculations. We don't think that Metro Properties was ever conferred with on this momentous task. And they're the ones who have the expertise to evaluate and give their opinion on these properties. We believe that Metro Council, or a committee within Metro Council, and Metro Properties, and the tax assessor should have been consulted before this RFQ was put out. And again, I will tell you that we had in our proposal a gift in lieu of cash of park property in other locations that could have been developed to make up for some of the 4,500 acres that Metro Parks is trying to attain. We were not given anything for that. We also had money to pay for development of Fort Negley. Cloud Hill was going to put up $7 million up front for infrastructure improvement, but they would be getting that back through the course of this lease. And then they would, after that, then they would pay towards their lease payment. So is that a profit for Metro and us as citizens, or is it not? That was not evaluated, but they appear to be fully funded. Now, since this thing has come in, it's blown up all over town with protests from the African American groups, heritage groups, from the UNESCO wants to declare this site a heritage site, international heritage site. So it's a good thing that we have opened this up to the public to comment on. But again, I think we can do the right thing here very soon and make sure that this process, if you guys so deem, can be redone and done properly, and done with proper oversight, and done with some accountability on how the scoring is done.
Okay, thank you. I think you just made it. So do you guys want to take a break, or
Yes.
would the interested, you do want to take the break?
Please.
Okay, we will take a 5-minute break, and then the interested parties, if they wish to present, will have an opportunity to come to the table to provide any presentation that they may have to the committee. Do you all have time? Do you guys have a presentation for today? Just very short? Okay, well, we will. 30 minutes or less. Okay, 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene. And Mrs. Sandu, you said you wanted to state one final thing?
Just regarding the interested parties, I think if you look in the procurement rules, it doesn't allow, in your own rule, I didn't see where it allows interested parties to comment during this, but I think I have no problem with that. I think if interested parties are allowed to comment, then I think other stakeholders should also be allowed to comment if they want to. And if they can't do it at this venue, then their written or email responses should be accepted as part of this record for this.
Okay, we'll address that during our deliberation. Okay. With that, if you...
My name is Bert Matthews with the Matthews Group, and I just have a very short statement. I want to say that we stand behind our proposal and behind our experience. We're very proud of the team that we brought to this request for qualifications. We're very proud of the work and our history in Nashville. We're proud of each element of our submittal. We appreciate the time of the board that you've taken to listen to this and the time of the evaluation committee, and hopefully we're looking forward to moving ahead. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, that's very brief. Thank you very much. Do I need to have them? I'm going to go to the deliberation portion, discussion and deliberation by the board portion of this, but before we open it up for the committee to begin with their questioning, Nikki, can you address Mr. Sandhu's question regarding the interested party presentation?
It's appropriate for the board to allow those entities that submitted a proposal to make a presentation today, because they are a legally interested party in these proceedings. Individuals that did not submit a proposal, this is not the venue for them to make presentation, because again, the role of this board is pretty limited as to whether the solicitation was conducted in accordance with applicable law. So there are other avenues outside of this board for those that may have a general interest or that did not submit a proposal to make their views known to other entities that may consider this matter in the future. But this is not the appropriate avenue for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one more matter again, and we talked about this at the beginning of the session, but before we begin our deliberations, I do think it's worth repeating the responsibility of this board in terms of what we are assessing based on the facts that have been presented to us today.
Yes, the role of the board is to determine whether the solicitation award was done in accordance with applicable law and the terms and conditions of the solicitation. So the board reviews the record and the relevant information to determine whether the evidence establishes that the award or solicitation was done in accordance with applicable law. If the board determines that it was done in accordance with applicable law, the board can uphold the decision of the purchasing agent. If the board determines that the award was not done in accordance with applicable law, the board can modify the decision of the purchasing agent and remand the matter to the purchasing agent with further directions.
Okay, and I just say that before we begin our deliberation, because it is not the responsibility of this board to assess the merits of any individual proposal that was presented for the evaluation committee. We are merely here to assess the procurement process and whether laws have been followed. So before we begin our discussion, I thought that that would be worth noting. So I am going to open this up for discussion, and Nancy, you look like you really want to jump in here. So I'm going to recognize Nancy Whittemore.
Thank you. I have one clarification I need, and Jeff, I think you're the person who will probably need to do this, but a couple of times it was mentioned that the diversity plan and the financial plan was done outside of the process. And so if you will address how that's done and why it's done, so not that the evaluation team actually opens the cost, but why it's done in the way it's done, and is that why it's not considered outside the process?
Sure. On the diversity plan, and I want to clarify something that was said earlier. It was a question about the plan and a question about the ethnicity of the individuals. This is not about business ownership. It is about the plan submitted. And that's what reason I say I don't care about it, because I care about the plan. And the plan was done by the procurement division, conducted by BAO, by one individual, which is the standard practice for looking at diversity plans. And I'm going to kind of look to Michelle, because she can probably best frame why that is the case.
It's addressed, just answer to the best of your ability, and I'll bring in other parties as needed.
Okay. That's the way it's been.
Okay.
And then on the financial, I don't know why it's being called out as being processed outside the committee, because this was not cost submitted and evaluated separately. It was, in fact, a discussion on the proposal that came before the board. It was a consideration of cost as one of the criteria. It was not, and it wasn't cost as it normally would be if we were selling property and looking at the cost. It was about the entire financial plan for what was taking place. And so that was discussed by the committee, some with more knowledge than others. But in other areas, you'd find other people discussing things at a higher level.
But it was not outside the process.
It was not outside the process.
Michelle, do you want to talk about diversity?
Okay, go ahead, Michelle. And
Yeah.
would you just speak to that from a general sense, please, in terms of how the BAO scores the diversity?
Yeah, so typically, a diversity plan or an equivalent small business, service disabled, veteran-owned business plan would be scored separately by the Business Assistance Office to provide kind of a singular view and to ensure that all responses are reviewed through a single lens and that you don't have all members of the evaluation committee kind of bringing their own perspective to the review of that because there are specific established criteria listed in the solicitation. If we say, let's paint this room pink, 5 people may come in with 5 different shades of pink. Whereas here, we're looking at a singular approach to how that response is being scored, and that is the standard practice. The way that they are scored is consistent with what is requested in the solicitation. It does ask for specific things such as their stated commitment, any kinds of strategic approaches to maximizing participation, and that is designed to understand what their overall inclusion strategy is, not simply looking at who the owner is, or just simply looking at the businesses that would serve as subs, so that was requested among 4 other items. But what if any of those subs are unable to fulfill their duties through the course of the solicitation or the contract, the pursuant contract? What kinds of actions would you take to ensure that you maintain that strategic approach throughout the life of the contract, rather than perhaps saying, we lost this sub and that was our plan? What are you doing to ensure that you have that continuity throughout the life of the contract?
Okay. Does that answer your question, Nancy? Okay. I'm going to just start down here. And so, Monica,
May I add?
I'm going to recognize the board members and their questions first, okay?
This may be more of a comment because I think looking outside of the process is not the same thing as looking at a process that is imperfect, right? But would you speak to, Mr. Sandu mentioned a couple of times that the minority participation for Nashville is 2%. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so during the most recently ended fiscal year 17, the city reported 9.17% minority and women-owned business participation. That is based upon actual expenditures as well as actual subcontractor expenditure. I'm not sure where the 2% number came from. I have heard some rumblings about 2.8% African American business participation, but we look at the totality for our approaches of minority business. We don't, just look at African American or Asian American or Hispanic American. It is the full scope of it when we report. So last year it was 9.17.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have another?
No.
Answer you. Okay, Scott.
I have a question to the fundamentals. Mr. Sandu stated that the process hadn't been stopped. So in the procurement process, has the award been, okay, so the award was made, appeal was lodged, the appeal was heard by the purchasing agent, and now we're at the appeals board hearing. So we're still in the process.
From the time of the filing of the protest, the contracting process was stayed. Contracting, of course, is led by procurement. We're not involved in it. The mayor is not part of that negotiation process. So that needs to be broken away because it seems to be something to point to. As of July 1, there had been no negotiations, no contract development taking place. I'll let Michelle answer
As of
anything.
today, the same is true.
Okay. And from Nikki, I'd like you to give counsel to my question that we're not able to discuss or question the merits of the RFQ. The RFQ stands alone as the Procurement Appeals Board.
You have to, in order to make any decision that challenges the RFQ that was issued, you'll need to find that that RFQ contained illegality. So there's something in that RFQ that was not done in accordance with applicable law. And there has to be evidence presented that indicates what is it in this RFQ that was not done in accordance with applicable law.
And we don't have authority to question the members of the committee, the selection committee?
Well, this is not a trial, a testimonial proceeding where parties or appealing parties get to question and cross-examine witnesses. This is a quasi-judicial appellate body that reviews basically the parties that are part of this proceeding make presentations, present documentations, and then you make a decision. But there is no process for the parties to cross-examine witnesses, question witnesses. This is not it's not the appropriate proceeding for this body because it's not a trial body.
Okay, I may have some follow-up questions.
Ms. Donovan?
One question's already been answered as far as the finance and diversity outside the committee. You've answered that. And my other question is the consensus scoring with a score, is that the norm on all of your?
Yes, the bringing together for discussion, for consensus scoring, is a standard practice, and we've been doing it for years. They actually discuss, some people have different strengths in that on the teams, that's intentional, and as they discuss it, they come up with a consensus score. The individual conducting it will actually key in the score, and they can see it on the screen. The end result is the printout of the scores that we held up earlier. So, and that's the standard practice.
So for this RFQ, as the many before it, it's the same procedure?
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's all I have.
Okay, you guys are going to have to bear with me because I have lots of questions. Mr. Gleason, can you join us up here at the table for my first question? I want to specifically have just a short conversation regarding Mr. Sandhu's discussion about him being a minority, and but the evaluation being done based upon the business plan, okay, the diversity plan.
Okay.
Can you just, in terms for this board, I want you to distinguish that for this board so that we have absolute clarity about what that distinguishing factor is between those two. Because I listened to his remarks carefully, and I think we should be very careful and make sure that we understand with absolute clarity what we're saying here in terms of that component of the scoring. Okay?
Okay.
So if you would explain that to the board, I'd appreciate it.
As mentioned by Jeff, the diversity plan is not looked upon. We don't look at the ethnicity, race, or gender of the prime contractor. It's based off of the narrative that they submit, the information that's asked in the solicitation, those high points, what is their commitment to small business, how they plan to maximize their reporting, and so forth. Within that, we look at their responses, and it's based off of a matrix that's across the board that everybody is evaluated on, and points are associated based on that.
So do you have a recollection as to what was included in their plan?
There was an express commitment to utilizing for diversity. However, when you get to, any expressed interest as to their past performance or anything like that, there was no mention as to any work or how they've done with minority utilization prior to. They briefly touched on the outreach, how they plan to bring in diverse businesses based on the list that was presented, those that they proposed to utilize. Other than that, there was nothing else as to any assistance or anything like that they're going to use or provide those individuals.
And how was that distinguished from another firm that received a higher score?
It was clearly laid out in their proposal.
Can you be a little more specific?
They just hit, they plan on, for instance, if it was something with outreach, they plan on publicizing it in the newspaper, having small venues where those interested subcontractors would come in. They would provide that assistance with understanding what they're actually going to do with the bid packages that they may let out to these individuals, how they plan to report their subcontractor utilization back to Metro. There's a portion in there about prompt pay. Are they committed to prompt pay? I mean, these firms have identified those that got the points. And as stated, no prime that submitted a business plan got the 5 points.
Okay, that's helpful for me. Does any of the other board members need any more clarification on that? I just wanted to make sure that we had that discussion. Okay. If y'all have any more questions of Brian, I'll let him go. Okay. My second question, and I don't really know who to address this to, but I want to address the public information and document requests that were submitted in various forms and at various times over this last few months. Legal received one request, I think, and I think purchasing received a different request. I would like for someone to summarize for me what requests were received and where we stood in terms of turning over that documentation. And I don't know who's best to take that question.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we did what we were supposed to do.
So I know that purchasing received what appeared to be some discovery. It was interrogatories mixed with requests for production of documents. In a good faith effort to respond to Mr. Sandu, Jeff Gossage presented the documents that he could identify along with Terry Troop, even though it was discovery and it wasn't a public records request.
So that was the 1,000-page
Yes, and that was
document that he received.
released, I think, maybe 3 days or 2 days before the protest hearing. It was, we treat public records requests separately than something that was part of the protest. It was, I mean, we have 7 business days by state law to respond to those, and it was responded to in accordance with state law.
Do you have anything to add to that? Is there anything that was outstanding from that list of requests that he did not receive, or that we
It's
did
been so
not?
long, I could not tell you what documents were sent, and I don't have a way to go back and look at those. I do know we sent everything that we could identify to them. I sent more than I was advised to do so. Got my hand slapped a little. And there were questions like, I want the scoring done by the individuals of the evaluation committee. I cannot produce what does not exist. And that's the kind of questions that continue to come in. There were also questions about the mayor meeting with individuals. There were questions about surveys and studies. Procurement department does not manage the departments and require of them documents that are outside of our role. If you're redefining the procurement role, that's interesting. We only can ask for information from the departments, and the departments supply what they have. And if we're not supplied that, we can't give what we don't have. That's it.
Is there a follow-up on that? I may come back to that in a moment. Okay, my next question has to do with the RFQ. And I think you've stated this, but I just want to say this for the record. In terms of every firm had access to the same information at the same time.
That is correct.
And if there were potential flaws in an RFQ, there was an opportunity to raise red flags and to ask questions during the process if a firm felt like something was not correct in the process. And did that happen during the process?
Yes, the same set of questions. We did have questions raised.
But in terms of the initial RFQ period, were there any concerns listed prior to this proposals being submitted in terms of any of these issues?
There were questions asked for which we could not supply documentation because we didn't have that. If that's what you're asking. Was there a protest of the solicitation, which has happened in the past? We had a protest before it ever came to fruition. There was no protest filed prior to the award.
I'm just trying to make a determination as to every potential bidder had access to the same information.
Exact same information.
At the same time and had the same opportunity to respond.
Yes.
Ms. Lane?
I think it's fair to note also that built into the solicitations, all solicitations that we issue is an acceptance of the request for the RFQ as it's written, and that acceptance was attested to by all the offerers.
Okay. Does anybody want me to jump in here? Because I'm going to keep on going.
I have
Okay.
another question. Mr. Sandhu spoke about a conflict of interest on one of the committees, and I'm not real clear that conflict of interest, who that person is and which committee you're speaking to. Can you clarify that for me, please?
Well, we consider a couple of conflicts that, weren't addressed. One would be Clay Bailey, who's appointed later. We were initially told there were going to be 3, then 5, then 7 committee members. So committee members are added, and Mr. Clay Bailey was added after we'd already had discussions with him about our proposal, long, drawn-out discussions with him. So I don't know if he ever mentioned to the folks who proposed him that he already had discussions with us and maybe other members of the proposers, and I don't know if that is allowed or not. And I also think Mr. Sledge, who's a councilman for the district, refused to meet with us, but he was also employed by the PR firm for Cloudhead Partnership, and also the PR firm for Metro Parks, which is McNeely, Pickett, and Fox. And for him to, if he refused to meet with everybody, then I understand that, but I think for him to refuse to meet with us when it was in his district makes me a little suspicious of exactly what's going on.
So I will ask legal if this constitutes a conflict of interest as it relates specifically to this procurement.
No.
Well, there has to be a conflict that disqualifies an individual from participating as part of a member of the evaluation committee under the law. So it has to be a conflict that rises to the level as defined by law. Such conflicts may include someone who has a controlling ownership interest in an entity that submitted a proposal, also being a member of an evaluation committee, someone having a financial interest in an entity that submitted a proposal, failing to disclose that, and then being a member of the evaluation committee. Again, it just can't be allegations. There has to be material evidence presented that demonstrates a conflict under the law, and that this person will be prohibited under the law from being a member of the evaluation committee. So mere allegations are just not. Again, a council member refusing to meet with someone, that's not, there's no law that requires a council member to meet with somebody that's a proposer. So there has to be material evidence presented that shows that there is a legal conflict as defined by the law, as opposed to allegations, mere allegations or feelings or suppositions, etc.
If I may?
Yes, I'll recognize you.
I think Mr. Sledge did appoint or recommended the appointment of two, maybe more of the members in selection committee, so that should be also considered, because it's, I'll just leave it at that he did select a couple of, allow selection of committee members.
That presumes ill intent on his part.
I understand.
So is that what you're accusing?
No, I'm just, there's just items here that just don't feel right to me. And I know feeling have nothing to do with it. I have to have evidence, so I don't have any of that.
Okay. I wanted to be clear on that.
Yeah.
You good, Nancy? You good? I have another question, and I think this is probably again for legal. And most of these are just in terms of me just getting clarification on points I've heard for today.
I need to ask one question.
Yes.
Ms. Ecke said that it's about legality. I thought that the legality part of it would come in the next level of this process and should not be at this level of the process. This is not about legality. This is about the process. And it's not about whether the process is following the legal course, but it was following what is the correct course within your code, and if there's accountability. And there's not always accountability when you look at legal. If it's always been done this way, then you can say it's always been done this way, so we're going to continue always doing it this way. And that's where the problem lies. This has always been done this way. And that is why when we have 15% African American participation, the population in this town, we have 2% African American participation in building this town. And the 9.1% participation by minority disadvantaged businesses is skewed against the true minorities in this town.
Did you respond?
Well, I just want to reiterate what the standard in the code is. That is specified in the Metropolitan Code of Laws as the role of this board, and that is to determine whether the solicitation and award was done in accordance with applicable law. So the issue remains, any allegations, it must be shown how what was done was not done in accordance with applicable law. And that is the role that's been given to this board by the Metropolitan Council through the ordinance that's set forth in the code to determine whether the solicitation and award was done in accordance with applicable law, which will include constitution, statutes, procurement code, procurement regulations, and the terms and conditions of the solicitation.
I agree. And that's why I really want to be deliberate on, we've heard a lot today, and I want to make sure that everything that's come up in these discussions are discussed by this board today. The next item that I heard during this discussion was this notion of the committee shortlisting the group in terms and only 2 firms being permitted to move forward in the process, and other firms not being able to present to the board or to move to that next level. And I also want to speak to the legality of that. Again, I was writing notes along because I wanted to make sure that every issue was addressed for the board today. So, Ms. Ecke, could you summarize that, please, in terms of the law?
Yes, I'll actually read a portion of the code that addresses this issue, and that is 4.12.040, subsection F. And it says in relevant part that discussions may be conducted with responsible offerors who submit proposals determined to be reasonably susceptible of being selected for award for the purpose of clarification to assure full understanding of and responsiveness to the solicitation requirements. So that is a procedure that's allowed for in the code with regards to those entities who submit proposals determined to be reasonably susceptible of being selected.
The next point of discussion that I heard was the notion that the committee met, I'm just repeating what I heard, is secret in terms of their deliberation, and that was not an open meeting. So I will go to the lawyer again in terms of what is permissible in terms of when that information becomes public and the notice regarding those deliberations.
Okay. Of course, the procurement division is bound by state law in the manner in which they handle this RFP. Under the Open Records Act, it specifically states that proposals and statements of qualifications received in response to a solicitation and related records, including but not limited to evaluations, names of evaluation committee members, and all related memoranda or notes shall not be open for public inspection until the intent to award the contract to a particular respondent is announced. So that confidentiality is required by state law during the process when the proposal is being evaluated.
Okay. My next point that I wrote down is that there was a notion presented that we should have disclosed the scoring, not the scoring points, but the scoring process, and how those scores would be compiled in terms of how that's done. I'm not aware of a requirement that we disclose a scoring process within an RFP in the laws, that we disclose the point assignments.
The RFP did contain the factors that are going to be evaluated as part of the RFP process and the points to be accorded those factors. And that's what, that is consistent with law, that the factors to be evaluated be disclosed, and that was contained in the RFP.
Okay.
It says that the request, the Metro Code says that the request for proposal shall state the relative importance of price and other evaluation factors. And the RFP did have a section that set forth the factors and their relative importance.
I'm going to go through my notes and see if any other committee members want to jump in here. Again, I was trying to make note of all points being made that might be related to procurement laws and processes.
I'll ask the purchasing agent if the...
Which one?
Mr. Thompson.
The prior purchasing agent.
All the proposals were submitted timely?
Yes.
And they were qualified to submit?
Yes.
Okay.
I think those are my questions in terms of, Mr. Sandu, I do want to come back to you. Do you think that I have summarized for the board the items that need to be considered by this board in terms of the purchasing laws and rules and processes, again, without regard to the subjective nature, but have we missed anything that the board needs to have a discussion about before we continue?
Yes, I think it's important to realize that we can hide behind the legal language of how the code is written and say that everything was done per code and per regulation. But this was not a process that necessarily can be pigeonholed into something that's so codified, because there's so many different ways that this RFQ could be addressed and answered. And subsequently, the way it was evaluated seemed to be, to me, not consistent across the board. So you can say, well, yeah, they followed all the legalities and they followed all the requirements of, they've always done it this way, and it's always been done like this. But where is the process? Where is the accountability for that process? Nobody has asked me about, nobody has asked to produce or at least testify that there was no scoring, there were no comments, there were no notes from any of the evaluation committee members that discussed this. There were no recordings made in there, and it's beyond me to think that nobody in that evaluation committee, or none of the people who were monitoring this evaluation committee, made any notes or made any comments to come up with a consensus. It's beyond me to come up with a project that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that there's no accountability on how this selection was made. So the legality of this documentation and the RFQ can say that the whole process was done within the bounds of the code and the regulations and the law. But where is the accountability of that? Where is that accountability of that? Okay, and the RFQ, I think, also did say that the whole process was going to be evaluated by the selection committee, and now we're finding out that 35% of the evaluation was done outside the committee. So that I think is an RFQ. It's the way I read it. Does not seem to jive with what has been said, that it can go outside for part of the process evaluation.
Just a reminder of what is within the purview of this board's decision for today. It has to do with the legalities and the processes.
I think the legalities come at the next level, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if there's no more question, I'll entertain a motion from...
I make a motion that the purchasing agent's decision be upheld.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Purchasing agent's decision stands.
Not being good.